Hi there, I'm Reverend Dr. Kate R. Walker, and I am honored to serve as the minister of First Unitarian Church of Pittsburgh. Last Sunday, on October 23rd of 2022, our internet crashed, and we weren't able to live stream to YouTube, and that also meant our service wasn't fully recorded. So I'm offering the reading and my sermon to you, particularly for those who rely on YouTube to stay connected to this religious community. I offer now the reading. It is by Matthew Rosen, titled, You Matter. There is no one like you, never will be again, from the birth of the earth to its outermost end. You, an eager shout, a sacred yes, that moves your flesh, your bone, your breath. You, she, he, they, you are whole and okay, gracefully teaching your truth and your way. You cannot be forgotten. We cherish you so. Your voice and your hands can do more than you know. You see old things anew. You turn them and test them. Your wonder exhausts our old words to express them. You speak and lay bare all you dig up and hold. Aloft from the dust of conventions grow cold. You upend every rock and pursue every glimmer and give a new name to each sparkle and shimmer. You chart our new paths, go beyond our horizons, new friendships, new stories, your hope always rising. You welcome and wanted, whatever your skin, wherever the neighborhood you were born in. You play across fences that keep us divided. Old walls become weak when your love is ignited. You call us to kindness and questions, reminding the life of our living is found in the finding. You, there was no one like you, never will be again, from the birth of the earth to its outermost end. You matter. You do. We'll keep learning with you. Now stand on our shoulders, see what you can do. I offer this sermon to you, a reflection titled, You've Got a Friend, or do you? I loved watching the TV shows called Friends in the 1990s. For 10 seasons, I invited Rachel, Monica, Phoebe, Joey, Chandler, and Ross into my living room. I watched how their lives unfold and how they evolved with one another through early adulthood. I was also captured in the early 2000s by a show called How I Met Your Mother. It was centered around a character named Ted Mosby and his friends. And it was actually loosely based on the real life of the creators of the show. And then there's another show that I really, really love called Firefly. Have to put a plug in for that. Also about friends on a spaceship, kind of cowboys in space kind of show. What I've come to realize is that a lot of my favorite TV shows are based on friends. Friends going through life's ups and downs. And I can never get enough, kind of this visceral bringing into my own life of their angst and their joys and celebrations. As the series ends, through many reasons, but typical as well, marriage and children, moving, and even death, we watch these friendships unravel and they shift into a different gear, even though we're hoping that they stay bonded to one another as they drift apart. But we know that's not how life is actually reflected in reality. Jennifer Senior, an author in The Atlantic, wrote an essay about friendship, and she notes that most friendships end because of lack of maintenance or upkeep. We just don't make the effort to stay in touch. When we're young, how we create friends, how we commit to friends begins its formation at a time when we're most vulnerable. We need to be creating large social networks crucial to our mental health when our ego identity is starting to develop and the spiritual grounding and moral development is starting to be in formation. And we're starting to face some of life's earliest changes and big life decisions. That's the time when we need friends the most. Lately, I've been watching a sci-fi show called Stranger Things that features a bunch of middle schoolers and high schoolers through the different seasons. And they are going through the norming and forming and reforming and normal relationship issues in addition to alternate universe kind of stuff. You know, it is a sci-fi movie, TV show, as I said. And as they get older, they become increasingly important to one another and their mental and their emotional and physical health. And I really love seeing how they stay dedicated to one another. What few studies we have about friendships, and it's notable there aren't many, which indicates there's not much money available for studying of friendships, but what we know is that friendships help us tremendously, not just emotionally, but also physically. They help boost our immune system and help keep our heart healthy. What we know for sure is that loneliness can kill us at any age. Friends are so important that if we don't have friends, we will actually fill that vacuum with imaginary friends when we're young and also when we're older. There's a story offered by Carol Lute Johannan, who is a social worker and an author. When she was caring for her mother as she lost much of her sense of herself to dementia. And she talks about how part of the therapy for her mom was to look in the mirror and be reminded of who she is. But her mom didn't see herself. She saw friends. She created friends every time she looked in a mirror, and ongoing relationships with friends that moved from mirror to mirror. Carol talks about a time when they were waiting in a doctor's office and her mom was getting increasingly anxious and starting to pace, which is not uncommon, unfortunately, when we're facing dementia. But then her mom caught a mirror in the corner of her eye, and she went over and found one of her friends. And they continued on in a conversation that they'd had just a few days prior in a different mirror. And it calmed her in a time when she was feeling increasingly anxious. We need our friends in so many ways, and some would say that friends should be put as important in our network as our family and our children. That the bonds of friendship, as they help carry us through all of our joys and our celebrations, as well as our deep-wrenching pain and truth-speaking and our occasional ugly tantrums when we don't get our way, that our friendships help return us to a sense of dignity and self-respect and remind us that we're loved and that we matter. Now, for those of you who are still working, there is a strong pull to the job. In fact, there's kind of a gap from young adulthood to when we're seniors again, when we don't pay as much attention to our friends because of growing families and careers. But the thing is, with our friends, we may not be legally bound to them by marriage or by blood through family. We are bound to them through that bond of love and commitment. We have to, though, continually opt in to our friends, continually say yes to them. And I think for me, that's what makes them so special. It's their very fragility and the demands that they place upon us. We can't always assume that the bond will remain strong when we neglect them. We have to work at it. If the pandemic has shown us anything, it has shown us the importance of friendship and that it can't be overstated. And it's true, I know friendships can be fleeting. They come and go. Maybe they only last a few weeks, months, or just a couple years. And they could be situational. I had very, very close friends many years ago when I was working for Greenpeace. 5 days a week, we were deep and intense in our work on saving the environment. And 2 years we were bonded together, socializing as well. But I'm no longer in touch with any of them. No contact. Our friendships can be that kind of situational intensity, where we find people that have this sense of a mirror, like they know us, and a deep intensity and affirmation of who we are. Sometimes it's almost on a might say, a mystical level. Several years ago, when I was living in Boulder, I went into a coffee shop and saw one of my old friends, and he was sitting with somebody else. And when I walked over, he said, "Do you know each other?" And we both looked at each other and said, "Yes, of course we did." He invited me to sit down, and we engaged in conversation. And about 5 minutes in, I looked at the new person and looked at me, and we realized we had never met. We had never met, but yet we had picked up as if we were old friends being reunited. We were both completely perplexed, and what we soon discovered is that we really came from the same cloth. We were both born and raised Unitarian Universalists, and we were both children of preachers. We worked together for the next 2 years at our local church as volunteers in the youth group and had a strong friendship. But we're no longer in touch. But I have a sneaking suspicion if we saw one another, we would just pick up where we left off. Our friends can also be complex intersection that almost need a power analysis. There may be issues of class, race, education, ableism. They may prey on our ego at times. We may be envious or jealous of our friends. They may put demands on our capacity for compassion and push our fragile egos into directions we don't like. The thing is, our friends and social networks, though, are always with us, and it's something to pay attention to and name those intersections in our lives. Kind of a power analysis, if you will. And as our friendships shift gears in the 21st century, we have to recognize the benefits of social media. How many of us have been contacted by friends from high school, or we've reached out to old college friends, or even further back to middle school. I was reminded last week after my sermon by a beloved church member, and after I lambasted social media for kidnapping our brains for creating devious algorithms, that there are really benefits that do come out of social media, particularly Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. As we are reunited with old friends, but we also manage to stay connected in ways that we just really couldn't before without seeing photos and updates of each other's lives. It gets past all those time issues and geography, doesn't it? In a really wonderful way. But even there, our friendships are tested for loyalty, you might say. Is just liking somebody's photo enough to sustain a friendship? Would you call them if you really needed them? Do you feel loyal to them in times of divisiveness, when you realize that their posts are posts you don't agree with? Loyalty in friendship is an important hallmark of long friendships that endure through time. I like to think that I'm a loyal friend. If somebody calls me, I call back. If I get a text, I respond. If somebody is in need, I'm on deck. And I have to confess, I have dropped some friendships when they weren't reciprocated, when there was no opt-in to me. I need it to go both ways. I need to know they want to be in the relationship as much as I do. I learned this from my mom about loyalty. My mom had 2 best friends. One of them was named Susan. She was a single Jewish woman who was having an affair with a married man, and we did our best to support her in other ways she needed. She even lived with us for a while, and at one point she said, I was like the daughter she never had. She and my mom truly were united. And then some point, I think I was off in college, Susan stopped responding to my mom's phone calls. We actually never heard from her again. We knew she was okay from her family, but something had splintered in the friendship, but we never knew what it was. There was no truth. My mom was heartbroken and felt deeply rejected. Then just a few years ago, when I was serving a church in Virginia, I got this email on my professional email address, which can be found on my church website. And it simply said, Dear Kate, I'm glad to see that you're doing so well. I'm sorry your mother died. It's good to see how you're doing. Susan. And I'm like, Susan who? I really had to think about it. And I looked at the email address and I didn't recognize it, and then it hit me. That was my mom's old friend, Susan, reaching out across time. I eagerly responded, trying to reconnect with her, finding out how her life was, what had happened to her, how is she? But she never responded. Again, it was just this kind of an emotional hit and run. I felt the pain that my mother felt so long ago, kind of a betrayal from the past, and it taught me about loyalty. And I have had friendships broken with my heart in 1,000 pieces. I have spoken truth that was not well received, and I have heard truth that I did not receive well. I had 2 college friendships that were broken, and they went completely sour, only to be healed after many years. One of them just last August. We reunited with hugs and tears, smiles, and laughter. Time had done its job for the 2 of us, and, well, frankly, we're both on the other side of 50 when perspective about friendships changes. And we do all lose our friends to the ultimate severing of bonds, death. Maybe we see death coming down the road. Maybe we have time to say goodbye to what feels like a lost sibling. Or perhaps death arrives with a sudden and bewildering shock. I think all too often we don't even know some lost friend has died until we're reading an obituary in the paper and we realize that it's too late for that phone call. Our friends, they tell us who we are. It's like a mirror, but hopefully it's a healthy mirror. I have had the joy of seeing many friendships evolve in the churches that I have been serving over the years. Friendships that have been forged over dishwashing and bulb planting in the garden and quilting and book studies and, yes, even budget meetings. We are more likely to find our bonds ripe in the grounds of mutual faith, where we find our like-minded people when political alliances are in alignment. But in today's divisive world, friendships across religious and political borders are at risk, particularly the ones that are in person. And I think we're less inclined to include diverse thinking and ideas in our social networks, and resulting in a hall of mirrors that really only look like us. People who think and look and affirm who we are. My mother's other best friend was Mrs. Allison, as we always called her. She was a single black woman with 4 kids. And we kids would get together for games while our mom sat over cups of tea, and they would talk about raising children and what other gossip they wanted to find in each other. But they offered all of us something special, as we children were able and invited to cross racial and cultural boundaries. And my mom once again modeled for me the importance of building resilience across diversity. I know that my mom was stronger because of her friendship with Mrs. Allison. Sometimes friendships, though, really are the ones we least expect, the ones that we need most in times of peril. There's a story by Foxglove Lee, who is an author specializing in LGBTQ stories and books for teens and young adults. And she talks about when she was a teenager, around the age of 13, when her father lost his job and his alcoholism increased, that the family became increasingly at risk with violence at their home. And it took a long time, but eventually Foxglove's mother was able to get her father out of the house and get a restraining order placed on him. But he kept coming back at them with threats and demonstrating that he wanted the house and them back. And he would threaten them with the guns that he had in his possession. When he showed up, the police responded. But when it was just threats, the police couldn't do anything. And then one day, it was just escalating more and more, and they didn't know what to do. until finally they went next door to a neighbor. Foxglove explained what was going on and said that her father had said he was coming later in the week on this day, and she was terrified. The neighbor knew exactly what to do, reached out to the rest of the neighborhood, and on that day, when Foxglove's father had threatened to come, they all showed up. And then they stood shoulder to shoulder, arm to arm in front of their house. And when Foxglove's father drove by, he just slowly looked at all the people and kept on going. Everybody was cheered by this response and felt emboldened. Foxglove's mother said thank you to everybody and said, please go home, you've done enough for us now. But they said, no, he's going to be back. And they stayed there the rest of the day and through the evening. And sure enough, Foxglove's father did come back many times, but they stayed strong. Foxglove learned that sometimes the biggest obstacles to reaching out to community and to friends is internalized shame. Shame. Such an important story to realize. Yet I'm going to take an educated guess that many of us have had the same barriers inside of us when we haven't shared our stories of vulnerability with each other out of shame. It is so important in just a moment that we can change something, transform something by reaching out, asking if you're okay without judgment, inviting people into our lives or offering ourselves to them. Here's something extraordinary about the human brain. This is what we know in the great discoveries of the 21st century, is that our gorgeous brains are constantly rewiring ourselves based on our daily activity, what we are paying attention to. In the end, what we pay attention to defines us. So what if we paid attention to those bonds that define who we are? Our neighbors, our community, those friendships that come and go, and those that endure. That's what literally transforms us in our brains. And as Unitarian Universalists, we have our principles, our values embodied in our principles, and each one of those principles asks that we be in relationship with others. They are all reliant on being part of a community that helps define us with our justice and our equity and our compassion, a community that asks a lot of us, but yet it is how we endure. When we think about it, religious history is there throughout time, relying on community and friendships that bond us. Look at Jesus. He had his own group of friends. What an extraordinary journey he had. And if our brain is constantly being rewired by what we pay attention to, then let's pay attention to what we want to be, who we want to be. And friends provide the love, the resilience, and I'm going to say one more important thing in our lives. Friends provide us with laughter. Laughter, that thing that helps us relax, helps us guide our way to humility sometimes. So I offer one more story about two of the greatest friends in literary history. That is Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. The two longtime friends decide to go camping. After a good dinner and a bottle of wine, they rest for the night and go to sleep. After some hours, Holmes wakes up and nudges his long friend. Watson, look up at the sky. Tell me what you see. Watson replies, I see a million stars. Ah, and what do you deduce from that? Watson ponders for a minute. Well, he responds, astronomically, it tells me that there are millions of galaxies and potentially billions of planets. Astrologically, I observe that Saturn is in Leo. Horologically, I deduce that time is approximately 3:15. And meteorologically, I suspect that we will have a beautiful day tomorrow. Theologically, I can see that God is all-powerful and that we are a small and insignificant part of the universe. But what does it tell you, Holmes? Holmes was silent for a moment, and then he responded, Watson, my friend, you idiot. He says, someone has stolen our tent. This is what friends do for us. They help us laugh when they point out the obvious, when we have missed something in our lives, and they guide us directly to it. If our relationships change our brains, my friends, then we need to invite in those bonds that help guide us in the darkness, that whether they foster or fail us, they help alter who we are, helping become into the best of who we are. But more than anything, they remind us that we matter. They remind us again and again that you matter and I matter, and together we can help change the world. May it be so. Go forth, my friends. Be with one another. Reach out. Opt in. Amen, and blessed be.